Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Appreciate you still following along and hanging in there with us. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Anthony Chaffee on. Dr. Chaffee, thanks for spending the time.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
You've got a really interesting background, and I mean, in my research, I got stumped on. You went to university at 15. Is that right?
16. Yeah, started at 16.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Super. That's not common where you're from, right? Well, it's not common anywhere, if I'm understanding is correct.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, there are different programs. Like at my school, you could take the SATs early, and if you did well enough, you could start taking classes as like a non-matriculated student, and you just and then you get sort of high school and university credits at the same time. So I would go to university during the day, and then I go and play sports at the high school after that, and
Unreal.
things like that. Yeah.
Okay. So good. So you've been a bit of a brain box for a while then.
Yeah.
So you're a medical doctor. You're a neurosurgical registrar over in Perth, where you are. Former professional rugby player, and you spent years dissecting the science of human nutrition. Most notably, you argue that plant toxins are a hidden factor in chronic disease, and that a strict animal-based diet may be the key to unlocking metabolic health, longevity, and performance. So, do you mind just walking us through your background education and how you ended up believing what you believe about nutrition and plants?
Well, so when I started university, I was always interested in the sciences. Math and science were always my favorite subjects. I always wanted to be a doctor, and so I was looking at my prerequisites for pre-med, and um, and I was also an athlete, and so I also wanted to know what was the right nutrition, how to be as healthy as possible. I never separated those two things. That eating healthily and living a healthy life, obviously, it was going to make you healthier. And as a doctor, you want to know how the body works. You want to know how to keep people as healthy as possible using diet and lifestyle measures and not just medications and things like that to treat symptoms. So that was always something that I thought was an important thing to know about as a future doctor. And took nutrition classes, took biology, botany, cancer biology, all these sorts of things. And was getting the sort of the standard sort of training that everybody else gets, fat bad, vegetables good, maybe limit meat and all that sort of stuff. Cholesterol is a bad thing or whatever. It's all just a sort of a trope now. But when I was taking cancer, but I never bought that meat was bad for us. I always knew that, humans were apex predators, and then we've always evolved eating meat, that there were really important things in meat. I think it was, thankfully my family, studied nutrition. And like there was a nutritionist, Adele Davis, 100 years ago. We had her books for like generations in my family, and they were, so those are the sort of things that we more followed. And if you were going to like cook vegetables and things like that, or eat vegetables, you wouldn't eat them raw. You prepare them in a certain way because they had chemicals in them. Like Adele Davis even said, you don't ever eat raw spinach because they have oxalates, which can be very harmful. We know this in Western medicine. 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. So these oxalates from plants get in, bind to the calcium in your bloodstream, form stones, and can block up your kidneys. But they do a lot of other things in your body too that are deleterious to your health. And Adele Davis 100 years ago was saying, well, this is how you traditionally eat spinach. You don't just eat it raw. You poach it or cook it with milk or dairy. So cream, milk, or cheese. So you think of the classic dishes with spinach, like spanakopita, which is feta cheese with cooked spinach with feta cheese, cream spinach, those sorts of things. And that calcium would leach out and neutralize the oxalate so that it was safer to eat. So I grew up knowing all that stuff. But at the same time, you're sort of told you're supposed to eat this balanced diet. You're supposed to have carbs and veggies and meat and all that sort of stuff. And that gives this balance. And then I had a professor of cancer biology who basically told us that this wasn't exactly true, that plants have a lot more defensive chemicals than we really realize, that we know this intuitively. You get lost in the woods, you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant. Most of them will make you very sick or even kill you. So, we understood about this concept of edible plants and inedible plants, ones that were so toxic that you would die if you ate them or get very, very sick if you ate them. Socrates died from drinking hemlock, right? So this is, just, North American water hemlock, half a leaf will kill you from intractable seizures within 1 or 2 minutes, right? And you can't really reverse that. It's extremely toxic. So these are things that I knew growing up. This is things that I knew studying botany, that every living organism has a defense mechanism, and plants, because they're stationary, they can't run away or fight back like an animal can. Their main defense is chemical in nature. They have about 1 million different defensive chemicals that we have categorized, classified, and even named. And so this professor was basically pointing out that just because something is an edible plant doesn't mean that it doesn't have these toxins. And just because they're not fatal toxins doesn't mean that they can't cause a buildup of chronicity and pain and damage and inflammation over the course of time. And because this was a cancer biology class, he was putting this in terms of carcinogens. So that these things could cause stress to the system, damage the mitochondria, cause DNA damages, and then eventually precipitate cancer. And he said that, this is back in 2000, that Brussels sprouts had 136 known carcinogens, and that mushrooms had over 100, that spinach and kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, every single produce item that you've ever eaten, we were given lists of these, and they had dozens, if not over 100, known carcinogens in them. We know this intuitively as well, right? Because we eat things like tomatoes, or we eat avocados, or we eat grapes, and we think, oh no, those are fine, but they actually will kill cats and dogs, right? Because there are toxins in them. It's just we have more defenses towards those toxins than cats and dogs do. And so all plants are toxic. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to detoxify them to a greater or lesser extent. But even herbivores, strict herbivores that only eat plants, they only eat very specific plants. So a cow can't just go around and eat any random plant. They have to eat very specific ones because that's their evolutionary niche. They can eat those plants. They don't have to compete for resources. That's a very common theme, that certain animals will have evolved to be able to handle the toxins in a certain plant, such as koala with eucalyptus. There's almost nothing else eats eucalyptus besides the koala, but the koala doesn't eat any other plants either. And so that's their evolutionary niche, and that's their, they have that sort of protected resource. So we were very taken aback by this. He was saying that there was all these toxins, all these carcinogens. They're quite abundant, that there were about 10,000 times the amount of toxic elements in vegetables than the pesticides we spray on them by weight, and that was hundreds of times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we spray on these things, which are sprayed on to be toxic and fatal to animals and insects trying to eat them. So we can't, and the plants are worse. And this was work from Professor Bruce Ames in the 1980s from UC Berkeley. Ames then concluded that obviously these pesticides aren't that bad, because obviously fruits and vegetables are good for you, because that was the wisdom of the time, was that fruits and vegetables are good for you, and they're way more toxic than the pesticides we spray on them. Therefore, the toxic pesticides can't be that big of a deal. Well, that's an assumption, but the data showed that there's 10,000 times more toxins in the plant than the pesticides, and that the plant toxins were hundreds of times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides. So that's what the data actually showed. And so our professor was basically very much in that camp, that these plant toxins were not a good thing. And so he ended up basically saying that he didn't eat salads or vegetables, and he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables because, in his words, plants are trying to kill you. Like, why would you eat these things? Why would you step into that defense? It's like getting into a pen with a raging bull, and pissing it off. You're asking for trouble, right? That bull doesn't want to hunt you and kill you and eat you, but if it feels that you're a threat, it will absolutely try to kill you. And that's what plants do as well. They have no problem with you dying if they get to live. Latex, we use latex gloves. Latex is a sap that when an animal chews a particular plant, it starts releasing latex that's so tacky. It's like a glue, and it glues their mouth shut, which is a pretty elegant way to stop something from eating you is glue their mouth shut, right? Now they can't chew you, but the problem is now they can't eat at all, and they often die from starvation or from getting eaten because they can't get food after that. So again, the plants have no problem with you dying if they get to live. So that was I think I was about 20 years old, and I just stopped eating plants altogether. I was like, right, not doing that, and I just defaulted into just eating meat and eggs, and I felt better than I ever have in my entire life. And it wasn't actually until 5 years later, when I was 25, and I was playing rugby in England, actually at Newbury, as we were talking about earlier, that that I sort of fell off of that, because the meat that I could get there, some of it, wasn't sort of the same as I could get in the U.S. A lot of it was breaded. I even found that I was just going to like a Sainsbury or something like that. I found out later they could like inject the meat with water to like bring the poundage up, so they could charge you steak prices for water. And but whatever was happening, I couldn't make these things brown. They would cook all the way through, and they'd just be gray and sweaty. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Why doesn't meat cook like it does in America? And you go to a butcher, you're fine, but that
Yeah.
stuff that I was getting wasn't good. And so I ended up defaulting over as like, okay, well, I'll just get these chicken drumsticks and things like that that are already pre-cooked, because this is just getting stupid. But they had breadcrumbs on it, and I was like, okay, well, is that going to be a problem? I mean, dose makes the poison. There's not that much of it. Maybe that's not that big of a deal. And yeah, it's true. Dose does make the poison, but the dose is really small. People don't realize that. And I felt that my athleticism and my endurance and my ability to recover was seriously impacted by that. And I remember thinking, like, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I have before? Am I not working out as hard? Am I not pushing myself? 25 now? Am I just old? Am I just dying now? And so that's what I just chalked it up to. I was like, well, I guess I'm just old now. Yeah, it's 25 is it, but at 25, I felt like a superhero. 25 and a half, I did not. And I didn't put two and two together until 12 years later, 13 years later, when I was just back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. And I came across information that just showed pretty clearly that humans actually are carnivores as a species. That's just the kind of animal we are. And I looked back on my early 20s, when I felt like an absolute superhero. I couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. I had this massive athletic potential, and I never felt like that again. Even at 25 and a half or 26, 27, still playing professional rugby, I did not feel like I did at that time. And I could never figure out how to get back to that. And then all of a sudden that I clicked. It was like, that's what I was doing. I was eating as a carnivore, and we are carnivores, and that's our biology. And all animals, if you feed them something that they're not designed to eat, they don't perform as well. They don't feel as well. They get sick. They get diseases. They get autoimmune diseases. They get diabetes. They get cancer. They get all those same things that we get, but only when eating an incorrect diet. And so that just sort of flashed for me. And I said, okay, right. I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just cut them out. And at the time I was eating just green veggies and lean meat, because I was trying to lean up for rugby and try to get back into rugby. And it wasn't working. I was fully inflamed. My back hurt all the time. My joints hurt all the time. I was retaining water. I couldn't lose weight. Didn't feel good. Didn't have much energy. And then when I just cut out the greens and started eating a lot more fatty meat, and really went focused on the fattiest cuts, because at this point I had already come across research showing that the whole idea about saturated fat and cholesterol was complete hokum, and was absolutely not true, and was not the cause of any disease or poor health outcomes, certainly not cardiovascular disease. And so I started eating more fatty meat, and I cut out all the veggies, and I massively improved my health. I started losing weight immediately, lost all this water weight, inflammation just drained out of my body. And within 2 weeks, I felt so good. I said, right, it's time to go back and play some rugby. And so I went back out for the 38 years old. I went back out and started playing for the professional team in Seattle at Seattle Seawolves. That was their first year. And so I started playing with them, getting back into it, was getting in shape, was feeling great. I ended up hurting my knee, so I couldn't actually play out that season, but my body felt amazing. And, it was, and so I got really interested in that. And I started looking at this from a medical perspective, that human beings are biologically carnivores, but we are not eating and living as carnivores. And so is that having a negative effect and impact on our health? Is that the cause of all these chronic diseases that we're seeing nowadays? And so I started digging into the research and spending, I had some time off at that point because I was still taking a bit of time off after coming back from Bangladesh before I started my new role in Australia, actually. And so I had time. I was spending 8 to 10 hours a day just reading studies and looking things up and asking questions and trying to find literature to answer those questions. If this is a problem, if plants are a problem, then we should see this. If
Mm.
autism is related to diet and from not eating meat, we should see, or do vegans and vegetarians have higher rates of autism? Yes, they do actually. And Texas A&M found that there was actually a causative link between carnitine deficiencies in vegans and vegetarians and the development of autism, because you require carnitine for proper development of your neurons in your brain and proper functioning of the mitochondria. And we make carnitine, and so it's considered a non-essential amino acid, but at the same time, we don't actually make enough of it all the time. 70% of people can make enough, but that means fully 30% of people, almost one third of the planet, don't make enough carnitine and need that from their diet. And carnitine only exists in animal proteins. So if you're raising your kid vegan or vegetarian and they're not getting enough carnitine, their brain won't be able to develop properly if they don't make enough of this stuff. So
Mm.
things like that. And I just started asking questions and reading studies. And I just found that there's this entire body of evidence and literature that was not even mentioned to us in medical school or beyond. Because as I realized later, it didn't have a marketing budget behind it, plain and simple. You have a drug that comes out, some sort of mechanism that you can assign a drug to. These drug companies make billions of dollars off of that, and so they can spend millions of dollars on a marketing campaign and getting that into the literature, getting that into the textbooks, getting that into medical schools and things like that, getting it on the news even. And whereas just these studies on ketogenic diets showing that this can reverse diabetes, it can reverse autoimmunity, that it can reverse heart failure, that it can reverse Alzheimer's, or at least improve these things. Those don't have a product behind it, so they don't have a marketing budget behind it to push this out there. But it's there. It's there for anybody to see. There's a massive body of literature that we just haven't looked at. And so the more I found, the more it supported this idea that we really shouldn't be eating plants. We really should just be eating fatty meat. And I remember thinking, I was like, okay, well, everything I'm looking at is just coming up steaks. But, maybe I don't want to be a victim of confirmation bias. I don't want to just be stuck in an echo chamber. Okay, what am I missing? You got all these vegans and vegetarians out there. You got doctors and researchers and PhDs saying that no meat is the way to go. Okay, so I'm seeing only meat is the way to go, and they're saying no meat is the way to go. So which one is it? What am I missing? What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And so I went and started looking at their talks, at their lectures, and asking them questions and looking at their blogs and writings and literature and all that sort of stuff. And I just found that everything that they've been basing this on was essentially came down to the idea that saturated fat and cholesterol causes heart disease. It doesn't. Or just misunderstanding of biochemistry, or just flat out lies, like trying to say that humans evolved as herbivores, which is nonsense. There's no evidence to even suggest that. And you can't even get B12 from plants too. So, and there's dozens of other essential nutrients that only come from meat that you can't get from plants. So the idea that we evolved as herbivores is honestly laughable. But that's what you see. You see people just completely making things up or basing their assumptions on this faulty dogma about red meat and saturated fat. And so even that helped confirm for me that this was the way to go. And since I've been applying that to my patient population over the last 7 years or so, I've just seen untold improvements and massive benefits in people's health. It's absolutely, I mean, it looks miraculous. I mean, it sounds far fetched because this is reversing diseases that are still to this day considered irreversible, like congestive heart failure, like diabetes, like autoimmunity. Autoimmunity just melts away. That one's the easiest one, because what I think of with autoimmunity is it's really just an exposure issue. It's not an actual disease. Not this one isn't diseased. It's that they're being afflicted by some sort of these exterior toxins, either from plants or agrochemicals or whatever, that this is actually triggering that immune response. And I'm not the first one to think that. I found papers going back to the 1990s from a Dr. Freed in 1991 who argued that the body actually can't attack itself. And I was certainly taught that in immunology, postgraduate immunology back 20 years ago. And he was saying that for the body to actually attack itself, it has to meet certain criteria which are not met, have never been shown to have been met. But every single one of these criteria to elicit this particular immunological response are all satisfied by the known effects of plant lectins in the body, lectins being toxins that plants make to defend themselves. So I'm not the first person to think that. It goes back even further. In the 1800s, there's a Dr. J.H. Salisbury who actually was curing autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, all the others as well, by putting people on a pure beef and water diet. And he again thought the same thing. There's a problem of digestion. You were eating certain things, it was causing harmful chemicals inside the body, it was causing these reactions. And you eliminate those out. He did a 30-year research project on this. It wasn't just like an overnight assumption that he made. He did a 30-year research project on this. And then he started treating people with just beef and water diets, and he was reversing rheumatoid, he was reversing Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And there's even literature on this, that randomized controlled trials in Crohn's disease patients, where if you remove carbohydrates and fiber, that can keep people in remission from Crohn's disease without medication for over 4 years, and contrasted with the control group that didn't remove carbs and fiber, and they stayed in remission. They couldn't even stay in remission 1 month without medications, right? So we already know that there's a massive impact and role that food has to play. So that sort of is a causative nature. You take away something and all of a sudden the problem goes away. That means that you bring it back and the problem comes back. I mean, that's a cause and effect relationship. There's another study with Crohn's as well that put people on elemental diet, which is sort of a very processed diet. It's sort of like a shake, but it has all the macro and micronutrients you need and nothing else. They're generally ketogenic because they're for kids with epilepsy largely. And so when you put someone with Crohn's disease on this elemental diet, they found that that's a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's disease than prednisone or prednisolone, steroids, right? Which is the gold standard, right? It just shuts down your immune system and your body can't cause this damage. And so just not eating certain things is a better treatment than steroids and the gold standard, right? So that again suggests a cause and effect relationship between things that we're eating and autoimmunity. So applying this to my patient population has been very rewarding. It's been very staggering. I've been working as a neurosurgical registrar. I've sort of transitioned into a preventative medicine practice, and where I'm able to apply this diet and lifestyle sort of interventions and actually reverse diseases, which is crazy. So we're going to be publishing a lot of our results. We're getting ready to publish a case series for 10 to 12 patients who have actually reversed multiple sclerosis, and not only from a symptomatic point of view, but there's a neurodegenerative process, a demyelinating disease that damages your brain and spinal cord. But not only have they, some of these people are bedridden and wheelchairs and things like that. And a lot of these people are leading basically normal lives now. Some are still in transition. But the most interesting part of that is that on MRIs, their lesions are actually shrinking, which has never been reported ever, not with any medication, not with any sort of intervention that I've ever heard of. I haven't come across anything in the literature. I think this will be a first to publish actual MRIs before and afters showing that there's actually resolution of the lesions, not even just stopping progression, but actually shrinking the lesions. So that, I think that's a first as far as I know anyway. And if it's not a first, it's an early, and it's pretty dramatic. So, I found that it's one of the more beneficial things that I've ever found for my patients, that certainly better than anything I've ever been taught. And it goes
Wow.
back to Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food, right? And then there's another one that's sort of attributed to him, but who knows? That said, before you try to heal somebody, first ask them if they're willing to give up that which is making them sick. Understanding that we're naturally healthy, we should be healthy by design. And so if you're sick and your body's falling apart, it's something that's in your environment. It's something that you're either doing to yourself or is being done to you. And if you figure that out and you remove that, it's just like a toxic exposure, lead poisoning, etc. If you're able to just eliminate that out, your body should get better on its own. And that's what I've been trying to do.
Unbelievable, and so many super clear. Thank you for that, and so many jumping off points. My first being, I can hear my actually producer of this podcast, my partner as well, Eloise. I can hear her question in
Mhm.
my ear already, which she's not even here, but I
Mhm.
imagine she'll ask us, which is, what about this idea of a little bit of stress is a great thing for us, this sort of xenohormetic effect from different plants and compounds. Um, Specific plants, how do you think about that?
Well, the thing is that again, there's about a million different defense chemicals. So, which ones are hermetic? At what doses? And are they the same doses as all the other toxins in that same plant that you're going to get? Right. So, let's say that there was a toxin that gave a hormetic effect. Why people say that there's certain plants are anti-inflammatory. It's sort of an argument of hormesis, which is some of these things like turmeric and things like that trigger your body to secrete glutathione, which is a really strong antioxidant. And so they think, oh, look at this! It's your body's releasing all these great antioxidants. Oh, okay, that's great. So you have this anti-inflammatory sort of effect. Why is it making the glutathione though? It's making the glutathione to try to detoxify all the poisons in the turmeric, right? So that's like, so
Also,
you know,
response
so
to
is
the point.
sorry.
It's in response to the negative effect of the turmeric.
That's it. That's exactly it. So we know that these things are toxins because our body tries to detoxify them, right? And that's what the glutathione is doing. And so your body is, so we say that, oh, look, you have this anti inflammatory effect. Your body's secreting more glutathione, but is doing that in order to address the toxins that you've just brought into it. Okay, so is that a hormetic effect or is your body just responding to a toxin? Is there an overarching reduction in inflammation on top of what it gets from detoxifying the poison that you just gave yourself? Maybe, maybe not. But no one's proven that. No one's actually shown one way or the other that this actually has a beneficial effect past that. The thing with hormesis is that it's the definition of hormesis is this is something harmful, and if it's too much, it's toxic. It can hurt you or kill you, and so you have to keep it below that level, right? Chemical hormesis is a very different thing than like exercise hormesis. You're stressing your body, you're exercising, and this gives a benefit in the long term. But there are good reasons for that, and with the chemical issues are they're really more the responses you get are like this detoxifying effect, like an anti-inflammatory sort of effect, which is trying to de-inflame you from the things that you just did to yourself. But also tolerance, right? So you could say that alcohol has a hormetic effect because it helps you build up a resistance and a tolerance to alcohol. But is that giving you an overarching benefit to other things as well, or is that only helping you if you drink copious amounts of alcohol? The argument that I've heard people say is like, yes, well, these plants have toxins, but you want to keep a steady supply of these toxins in there so that you build up this resistance to them, so that if you meet them, later on, that you're not going to get hit full force with this. That's like saying you should do heroin every day just in case you get, build up a tolerance to heroin, just in case you get hit with heroin 6 months down the road and it makes you crazy high and you can't control yourself. That's a bad argument. You have to know, and we're talking about a plant toxin being hormetic. You have to prove that it's hormetic. You have to prove what dose it's hormetic, because we all agree that hormetic substances past a certain point are toxic and harmful. So you need to be very clear and delineate what is the target range of hormesis. So what the chemical is, what is hormetic, what dose is it hormetic? And then, because this is coming in a plant that has thousands of potentially toxic chemicals in it, you have to understand, okay, are you getting a net negative from these other toxic effects, even if this were hormetic? And not only that, maybe you're saying, okay, well, maybe they're all hormetic. Okay. So you have to then list out all the different toxins that are in the plant. You have to find out if they're hormetic or not. You have to find which doses they're hormetic or not. And then you have to see, okay, how many leaves of spinach can I have to get hormesis? versus toxicity.
Mm.
And okay, if I want hormesis from the oxalates in the spinach, fine. How many leaves are hormetic? And then at that same number of leaves, am I getting a hormetic effect from the other toxins in the spinach, or are they too high or too low or whatever? So it's sort of a throwaway line. It's one that's used a lot, and it sounds good at first. It's saying, well, yes, there are toxins, but these are good toxins. These are toxins that are good for you, and like they're not. Your body's not. These plants are not trying to help you out. You know, digitalis was not formed in foxglove millions of years ago so that 70 million years later these hairless apes that might develop heart disease because of their lifestyle, bad lifestyle choices, that they might help them with their heart disease, right? No, they created this so they could stop the hearts of the animals trying to eat them. Sorry, I got my cat saying hi. It's a little naked cat. And so that's what they're doing this for. They're trying to kill you. You know,
Okay.
if you take maybe 50 micrograms too much digitalis, you're dead, right? So when we measure this in millionths of a gram for therapeutic doses, that's the hormetic dose. So you could
Mm.
talk about hormesis in the sense of medicines, but medicines are only beneficial during certain conditions. Like if you have heart failure, congestive heart failure, for example, and you take, you know, 50, 100 micrograms, whatever your dose is of digitalis, that can help increase the contractility of your heart. So this is a poison that is trying to kill you and stop your heart. But at the same time, if you take this in microdoses, in millionths of a gram, it can actually help you under certain circumstances. So that could absolutely be an example of hormesis if you are sick. If you're not sick, then it's not going to actually improve your health at all. But you're talking about microdoses. And when you're talking about in a plant itself, again, that digitalis, you don't know the dose, you don't know exactly how much is in it, you don't know the conditions it was made in. So you're not going to understand how much is in there. So you don't know if you're getting the hormetic dose or the toxic dose. And it comes with hundreds, potentially thousands of other chemicals. Are they good or bad? Are they hormetic? Are they in the toxic levels? So um, the hormetic the hormetic argument, basically, if someone wants to make that, they have to then show, okay, which chemicals are hormetic, what is the dose, how many grams of that vegetable can you have, what about the other chemicals, are they hormetic at the same dosage, and you just eat that exact amount of spinach or lettuce or whatever, then you're going to get hormetic across the board, something like that. It's very
Mm.
unlikely. It's very unlikely you're going to get any of that. But people generally just say that and say, "Well, hormesis," and then they don't, and then they walk away from the discussion. Think, "Oh, look at me! I've proven this." And sometimes a stressor is more beneficial than harmful. It's like, well, or it could just be harmful, right? And
Yeah.
so it has to be under strict conditions. And no one I've ever spoken to who, even people that lecture on hormesis, have ever been able to address that.
Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, very well put. Um, I'm of the, I get to speak to brilliant people like yourself a lot on this podcast. I know you've interviewed Dr. Thomas Seyfried and spoken to Don D'Agostino, and you're very plugged into sort of the metabolic health world. And
Hmm.
through this, I've come to believe that most diseases or most chronic diseases are metabolic in nature, and that keto is one door to that, like optimal metabolic state. It seems that carnivore is as well, but if you were to track the blood, be it measuring glucose levels or ketones of someone in strict clinical keto, maybe for cancer reasons or whatever, versus
Mhm.
someone on a carnivore diet, the blood work would look quite different. Mechanistically, what do you think's going on with carnivore, and how does that lead to sort of better metabolic health all around for all these different
Yeah.
chronic diseases?
So what blood markers in particular do
Ketones,
look different? Yeah.
gluconeogenesis, things like that, when glucose rises in the
Yeah.
presence of high protein, maybe C-reactive
Yeah.
protein, and your experiences of what's happened with your
Yeah.
own blood work with patients.
So yeah, I mean, I've tested thousands of people's blood work over the years. The thing to remember is that a carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet. It's a subset of a ketogenic diet. It's just a plant-free ketogenic diet. It goes one step further. We
Mm.
understand in ketogenic and ketogenic nutrition, ketogenic metabolism, that there are certain things that cause harm, metabolic harm, such as carbohydrates, sugar, alcohol, these sorts of things derange our hormones in such a way. They raise our blood sugar, which is toxic to the body. Elevated blood sugar causes direct damage to the vasculature in our body, damaging the blood vessels, damaging the blood supply to every organ and tissue in the body, causing end organ damage. It's the number one cause of kidney failure, number one cause of adult blindness, number one cause of heart failure. It's the number one cause of amputations, right? Because this is damaging the vasculature, it's damaging the blood supply. That's high glucose. And so in order to protect the body from that high glucose hyperglycemia, your body elevates your insulin. And that would be all well and good if the only thing that insulin did was lower blood sugar, but it's not. It actually is involved in hundreds of other processes in the body and the brain. And when you elevate that artificially with by elevating your glucose and your blood sugar, you're elevating that for all of these different effects, and you're actually causing very serious metabolic harm. So that is a major precondition to chronic disease is altering our metabolic state, our hormonal state. There's so many things. I mean, it's very interesting. People look up the different effects that insulin has in the body. It's wild. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. They're extremely important. It lowers testosterone levels in men. It lowers estrogen levels in women. It's a leading cause of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome in women, which is the leading cause of infertility. When that's insulin resistance. Insulin blocks the conversion of testosterone and estrogen in women, making them completely hormonally unbalanced and infertile. When you have elevated insulin, it downregulates the insulin receptors on the Leydig cells in the testicles, making men make less testosterone. And then when you reverse that and you resensitize your Leydig cells to insulin, all of a sudden, with less insulin, you're creating more testosterone. And the list goes on. I mean, it blocks the action and production of growth hormone, which is very, very important for obviously growth during puberty. Since the agricultural revolution, people have shrunk on average about 5 inches, right? And that could possibly be to these hormonal actions from growth hormone, where you're suppressing the growth hormone during puberty and you're just not growing as tall, right? But you need growth hormone throughout your entire life. So there are a lot of problems that carbohydrates, hyperinsulinemia, and hyperglycemia cause directly on the body. So that's a big first step. Carnivore diet addresses that. So does a ketogenic diet. You could eat a more lean protein diet and not be in as deep ketosis as someone who's really aiming for crazy high ketones, but you are in that same metabolic state. And that's the important thing, is that your insulin is low and you're able to access your fat stores. We call it a ketogenic state. I think it's a bit misnamed. It's really just a fat burning state. You're either burning carbs, you're burning fat. So if your insulin is high, it blocks lipolysis. It blocks the body's ability to break down fat for energy. And when insulin goes down enough, now you can access your fat stores, which is the main energy storage in your body. A 65 kilo individual with only 6% body fat maximally can store, with maximum carb loading, can only store about 2,400 kilocalories of energy in glycogen in his liver and muscles for his whole body. But that same 65 kilo individual with only 6% body fat, that 6% body fat has over 35,000 kilocalories of energy. So that's actually the main storage form. When you're in that fat burning metabolism, you have access to that, which is a lot better when you're an athlete as well, because you don't have to keep sucking down gels and sugar packets. You just constantly are tapped into your energy levels, and you completely regenerate your glycogen as well. That's been shown in human trials in elite athletes. So a carnivore diet is just taking it one step further. You're ketogenic, you're in touch with your fat cells, your insulin's low. That's the main thing. It doesn't really matter how high your ketones are, because long-term ketosis, you get more keto adapted and your ketones go down anyway. You have the Inuit who are eating extremely high fat diet. I think that 50% by weight of their diet can be fat, which is 90% plus calories from fat. And their ketones can be 0.3, 0.4, right? Mine are generally 0.3 or 0.4. And it's not considered in ketosis, but of course I'm in ketosis. I'm burning my fat, right? So it doesn't matter how high your ketones are. It matters that you can tap into your fat stores. That's why I think is a bit misnamed.
So that
Yeah,
personally,
sorry.
I was just saying, for me personally, that's where I've always thought, well, because I react really well to just steak and eggs, don't I? and I feel
Mhm.
athletic, really great. I feel awesome. Um, I do notice that sometimes my SHGB goes quite high if I don't eat
Mhm.
enough calories. So that's one question for you: is the people who say, "Oh, if you go pure carnivore, your SHGB goes through the roof." My
Mhm.
understanding is that's just a calorie deficit problem, as opposed to the diet itself. And then, secondly, I'd love to understand, because like you used to play rugby, and the nutritionists,
Mhm.
I would say I feel like garbage if I eat, a load of carbs the night before a rugby game. But if I
Mhm.
actually stay at ketosis at the time, I didn't know about carnivore then, I feel way better. So from an point of view, what would you say to the athlete on listening to this, being like, well, no, I've got a carb load for all my different things. I mean, if we start with the
Yeah.
SATV thing, go back into the athletic stuff.
Yeah. So sorry, I missed that last thing you just said. What was that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so if we could maybe just address like the hormonal
Yeah.
impacts of going carnivore, maybe
Okay.
acid like fluctuating, and then go into sort of how this affects athletic performance, being in that sort of
Yeah.
metabolic state.
So the thing is I have actually not seen people, because I tell people eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. I'm not telling people to go into a caloric deficit. I'm not telling people to undereat in order to lose weight. Weight loss is better achieved by eating optimally and normalizing your hormones and keeping your insulin, blood sugar, and leptin in check, and keeping track of your own hormonal metabolic state. And then the weight just flies off, and especially if you're exercising. So I have patients that have doubled, even tripled their testosterone levels. I've had professional athletes that have been patients of mine who have doubled their testosterone levels. And so whatever you want to say about the advantages or disadvantages of being in ketosis, you cannot tell me that it's a disadvantage to double your testosterone as a competitive male athlete or even female athlete. But it doesn't turn women into men. It just optimizes everybody. That's the main thing. And so I have never. I've heard the accusation that without carbohydrates being ketogenic, your SHBG will go up. I have never seen it happen in practice. My SHBG has been 34 for the last 7 years. I've checked my levels. It just has never changed. And so at 45 years old, I maintain without TRT or anything like that. I maintain healthy testosterone levels of a 25-year-old. And that's what I see in my patients. I have 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old patients who, when they go onto a ketogenic carnivore diet, they have this massive swing in their testosterone and hormones in general and health in general up to that healthy 25-year-old level. There's a number of reasons for that. One, testosterone is made from cholesterol. Now we're normalizing cholesterol. We're not trying to beat it out of your body system. When you go into ketosis, you go into fat burning metabolism, you have to transport fat to your liver. And how do you do that? You do that in carrier molecules called LDL and HDL. And they go up. And so people, oh my God, you're going to die because of all this cholesterol. No, that's natural. It's a metabolic state change. If you just fast for 5 days, your HDL and LDL go up as well because you're running on fat and you need to transport the fat. It's pretty simple. And because now you have more cholesterol and you're not eating these plant sterols that, sorry, come on, kitty.
It's great. I love it.
Because you're not having these plant sterols that are the plant's version of cholesterol that suppress your own production of cholesterol. That come on, buddy. That's now you're actually making a normal amount. Your body's making the amount of cholesterol that it wants. Now you have more substrate to make testosterone with. You're also not eating plants that have phytoestrogens and hormonal disruptors that will block your testosterone, will boost your estrogen. Soy has more phytoestrogens than the birth control pill. Actually, has 7 or 8 times as much estrogen as the birth control pill. Um, and things like what was it? Flaxseed. Flaxseed. 3 ounces of flaxseed has actually more estrogen than a fertile woman makes in a day, right? So that's the last thing you want to eat if you want to correct your hormones. For a man or a woman, it's going to really mess you up. Another thing is you're going to get more bioavailable nutrients like zinc. Zinc is required for testosterone production. Again, your insulin resistance is going to correct on a ketogenic carnivore diet, and so your Leydig cells are going to be more sensitive to your insulin, and you're going to have a higher signal to boost testosterone production as well. So all these different things, and there's more, play into increased testosterone production. I see this across the board. I'd say probably a good 90% of my patients, male patients, will have a massive increase in their testosterone levels. Um, I I really almost never see the SHBG go up. You know, a couple times I've seen it where people's their total testosterone will go up, jump up into that 25-year-old range, but then their SHBG will sort of come up with it, and their free testosterone will stay about the same, so they don't go down. But then as their body's getting more metabolically sound, and it'd be sort of the same thing if someone injects testosterone and you have this big, massive jump up in testosterone suddenly, that can elicit a rise in your SHBG as well. So people that inject testosterone actually find that after a few months, their SHBG starts climbing up and they have to inject more and more and more to get the same results. Right. So there
Mm.
could be something like that your body all of a sudden is just making so much more testosterone. Your body just says, whoa, hold on a second. What the hell was that? And has this sort of the same response. And then I see as they become more metabolically healthy, more hormonally healthy, the SHBG starts coming down, their total testosterone stays up, and their free testosterone starts coming up as well. So that's what I typically see. I did a whole talk on ketogenic carnivore athletes at a medical conference, and that's available on YouTube by that name. And people can go into the whole science behind it. But I mean, even just being able to access 35,000 kilocalories of energy and 6% body fat, that's already a massive improvement. There have been multiple high level um, studies in humans, in top elite athletes, showing that being in ketosis actually allows people to have better performance. So that has to take a caveat with that. So that's when you get properly fat adapted. So there's that idea of keto adaptation where your body turns on different genes so that you utilize ketones for energy better. That can take months, but it takes at least a couple of weeks to start being able to use those ketones properly. So there's studies by Professor Tim Noakes that are crossover trials, randomized crossover trials in recreational athletes that they put them in a keto group, randomly select them into a keto group or a carb group, and let them adapt for 6 weeks. And they had these um, athletic performances. They ran a series of 800-meter runs, and people were saying, "Well, they just have this built-up muscle glycogen left over. That's nothing clever." Say, "Okay, well, let's just keep running these until basically there's no way they'd have any glycogen left." They just did 800 after 800 after 800 after 800 after 800. The carb athletes had to keep sucking down sugar gels and Gatorades and things like that to maintain their energy and performance. The keto athletes just cruised the whole time. Then they had a 2-week washout period, and then they swapped the groups. So it was a crossover trial. So the keto group became carb group became keto group, gave them 6 weeks again, and ran the test. And again, no drop in performance whatsoever. The keto group just ran. They didn't have to drink Gatorades or anything like that. So that's at 6 weeks. Then you had McSweeney, who did a study, was it 2017, 2018, I think. And he took elite level, world-class level ultramarathon runners and Ironman athletes. They self-selected into a keto group or a carb group. And then they got keto adapted for 3 months. They had this for 3 months. And so then they had 3 tests. They had a 100-mile run, they had a 6-second sprint, and they had a critical power test, like a powerlifting test, right? So all the different ways you can athletically move your body. So explosive anaerobic power, sprinting, and then long distance, endurance running. Okay. And they found that the ketogenic group outperformed the carb group in all 3 fields. And the sprint and the critical power test came to statistical significance. So you can really only say the 100-mile, they beat all the guys on the 100-mile run, but you can only really say that was a trend that didn't reach statistical significance. So may have been a fluke. Who knows? But they did beat them. The other 2 came to statistical significance. So when people say, well, yeah, this works for endurance athletes, but it would never work for rugby. Well, no, sorry. The sprinting and powerlifting, that's actually came to statistical significance. And said, well, I don't see anybody in the Tour de France doing keto. Well, actually, it's Chris Froome, who's like a 3 or 4-time winner of the Tour de France. He does keto, right?
Does he? I didn't
And
know that.
so, yeah. He does. There's a ton of them, a ton of people that do this. Some of the top Ironman athletes, ultra marathoners, they do ketogenic. Some do even full carnivore, right? Rugby teams, half the New Zealand All Blacks have been carnivore for like 8 years, 9 years. I've spoken to a couple of All Blacks. They reached out to me on social media and commented on one of my videos and said, "Hey, keep up the good work. I really like it." And I was like, "Oh, hey, that's really cool. Hey, I heard that a lot of you guys, like the Frank brothers who were on the All Blacks, they've been keto, you know at least keto, if not carnivore, for years." And one of them had just got re-signed at 38 to a 3-year deal with the Crusaders, right? So these guys are still playing world-class level rugby at nearly 40. Um, and I think that's largely to do with being ketogenic. You get a lot of a longevity, you get a lot of reduced inflammation. Even arthritis point of view, arthritis, we're seeing damage in cartilage. When we take these samples out of the joint, we're actually seeing glycation damage, that damage from the glucose and the sugar damaging the cartilage and breaking it down. And so you're not going to get as much joint breakdown and degradation when you're in a state of ketosis long term. You're not going to break down your joints. You're just going to last longer. You're going to be an athlete longer. And so, yeah, so a lot of the All Blacks a lot of the Australian rugby teams are joining this now. Quade Cooper is openly carnivore. Sonny Bill Williams is openly carnivore. There are entire rugby teams like the Penrith Panthers, who are the top rugby league team, and probably since the origins of the league here in Australia. They won like 4 or 5 grand finals in a row. And they came out after they won last year and publicly said, yeah, we're all doing this animal-based carnivore diet. Right. And we just feel like superheroes. I have a friend of mine who's a sports medicine physician who is very fond of the ketogenic carnivore diet for his athletes. And he's worked with entire rugby teams and converted the whole team over. And one of them was at the bottom of the league. They were actually thought that they were going to get relegated, and they had no significant personnel changes. He got them onto ketogenic or even full carnivore. And all of a sudden they're in the playoffs. Right. So they went from almost being relegated to going in the playoffs and with no significant, personnel changes and things like that. They were beating teams that on paper, everyone thought these guys are going to get smoked, So there's quite a lot of traction on this. The Ironman runners and ultramarathon runners, they figured this out a long time ago, and they've been doing this more and more. So I think that there's a lot of benefits from being in ketosis from a performance point of view, but also from a longevity point of view, because you're not going to eat all these plants. You're not going to have the gut issues, all these sort of issues. You're not eating sugar all the time. You're not getting pre-diabetic. A lot of these athletes, these top athletes that they study, who's better, the keto group or the carb group? The keto group almost invariably has pre-diabetes or even diabetes. That's not going to keep you in the game all that long. There's another study by Volek and Finney, the FASTER trial in 2016. And they say that for high level athletic performance, you have to eat carbohydrates, because above zone 2 cardio, 55% VO2 max, you just start burning carbs. And that's true if you're in a carbohydrate metabolism and you cannot access your fat stores to oxidize fat. But if you're in a state of ketosis, even just immediately, they did this in the Supernova trial, and they basically said, hey, look, these guys are burning a lot of fat, over 92% VO2 max. But their performance has gone down. But that's because they tested them in the first week or two. They didn't give them a chance to adapt, right? But when you give them 6 weeks to adapt, all of a sudden there's no drop. Give them 3 months to adapt, there's a improved performance. So when you're in ketosis, this is multiple studies have shown this. Volek showed this as well in 2016, the FASTER study, that when you are in a state of ketosis, these guys were in state of ketosis for a month. The ultramarathon runners, Ironman runners, they've been doing this for years. Some of these people average 22 months. And they found that they were burning fat at over 90% VO2 max. And only then were they using some of their glycogen and blood sugar, which they were replenishing immediately. And they found they did muscle biopsies. They did a 3-hour run and did a muscle biopsy before, after, and then 3 hours after the run, after the recovery. And they found that the ketogenic group and the ketogenic and carb group had the exact same muscle glycogen at all 3 stages, before, after, and then 3 hours after recovery, even though the carb group was carb loading and then drinking gels and sugar during the 3-hour run, and then drinking a whole bunch of sugar and eating carbs after their recovery. They still did not replenish their glycogen any faster than the ketogenic group. So any way you slice it from an energy perspective, carbs are absolutely not the answer. And if you're adapted long enough, you are going to start outperforming yourself and your other competition.
Okay, so I'm going to give it a go. I mean, I've long explored keto,
Mm.
and I've done steak and eggs for a number of years and things like this. But I've heard you say that you actually have to be quite, the parameters are quite strict. So where are the boundaries of like how you would start with the patient doing this? Is do you fast with it? What types of meats are best? Are eggs allowed? Things like this would
Mhm.
be super helpful.
Well, it depends. If you don't have any sort of serious health issues like autoimmunity and things like that, you have a bit more, a bit more um, leeway, right? Someone with autoimmune issues, they really have to stick to just red meat and water if they want best results. Even eggs can trigger autoimmunity, especially if it's being fed corn and soy and things like that, because some of those lectins and toxins will actually get into the egg or get into the chicken and the meat of the pork even. So you want that ruminant meat that's the best, is the ruminant meat or just wild meat that's pasture raised, eating what it's supposed to eat. But barring that, you want the ruminant meat, the cows and the chicken, or the cows and the lambs, goats, venison, things like that, that have that 4-barrel stomach that can ferment and break down all these toxins, even in food that they're not designed to eat. So they can just break down, they can be a better filter for these toxins and get more nutrients and nutrition out. So those are the best. If you're not in that category where you're very, very sensitive to these sorts of things, then just eat any meat that you enjoy, that makes you feel the best and that you have access to and can afford. And if you like eggs, that makes you feel good. I mean, try to get pasture raised eggs. They are more nutritious, but you know, eggs are fine. Eggs are totally fine. Eggs are great. I mean, it's honorary meat because it just has all the precursors to turn into an animal, right? So it has all the things that you need to be an animal, to grow and build an animal. And so you just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You do that as many times a day as your body's telling you. If you're training a lot and you're working out a lot, especially if you're trying to put on muscle or not lose weight, then you're probably going to need to eat about twice a day to get enough nutrition so that you can satisfy your workload. And you want to try to get 1 to 2 grams of fat to 1 gram of protein. It's a very high fat diet, moderate protein. Your body has a limited capacity to absorb fat, and that's determined by your bile. Your liver makes bile, but it only makes a certain amount. It's slow to produce. And you store that in your gallbladder and you concentrate that down so that you can have a big dose of it in one go when you eat your fatty meal. Once you run out of bile, it's really hard for your body to digest and absorb fat. It's very difficult. You only do about 10% of this. It's usually like medium chain triglycerides. The rest of it is going to go out. It's not going to be able to be absorbed. And so it goes out in your stools. That's what keeps your stools soft. It's that excess fat that your body can't absorb. So if you're getting hard, dry stools, by definition, you're not eating enough fat. If you're getting loose stools, you could be eating too much fat. Now, there's other things that can cause loose stools: coffee, tea, artificial sweeteners, usually in the coffee or tea, even magnesium supplements or medications like metformin, for example. All of those can have a mild laxative effect. And when you get rid of fiber, even if coffee never gave you the runs before, now you get rid of fiber, which actually causes obstructions. It causes slowing of the motility in your gut. It doesn't speed things up, slows things down. And so that coffee is probably offsetting that. So you're going regularly, fine. Now you've gotten rid of that blockage and now it's too much. Okay. So if you're only eating meat and only drinking water, then you can gauge how much fat you're getting by your stools. And so if you're getting soft stools, even if it's once or twice a week, because you absorb 98, 99% of the meat that you're eating, and so you just aren't going to have all that much waste, as long as it's soft, then you're getting the right amount of fat. If you add in coffee and you have loose stools, well, the loose stools are probably from the coffee. It may not be from the fat. So you can actually hide under eating fat if you're drinking coffee or tea or some of these other sorts of things that can cause loose stools. So you want to try to have a clean slate to sort of see how much fat you're getting. But if you're ever getting dry stools, then by definition, you're not eating enough fat. It's hard to pass, that sort of thing, rocky, hard stools. You have to eat more fat. Even if you're eating 10 times more fat than you ever thought was healthy, you need more. If you're getting dry stools, you need more. Um, so with my patients, if they want to sort of ease into it, I always start them out, okay, just get rid of junk food, obviously, whole foods, focus on meat and eggs, that you eat as much meat and eggs as you want, get rid of the carbs. Go ketogenic, start that off right now. If you want some vegetables, just try to have and cooked in ways that we traditionally would make these things. Don't have a bunch of raw veggies that will have all their toxins available, right? And mix them up. Don't have the same ones every single day because you have this toxins build up. And so you'd have all the meat and eggs that you want, and then 2 fist-sized servings of non-starchy vegetables uh, for the whole day, right? But then you want to phase those out. And if people are able to just cut everything out, it's sort of easier to do that because you don't have to think, okay, well, what veggies can I have and how much carbs do they have and what about this? Just you're eating meat, you're eating eggs, and there's nothing else. It's the easiest way of eating in the world. You know exactly what you can eat. You know exactly what you can't eat. There's no gray area. There's no question about it. You eat meat, you eat eggs, and that's it. You eat it any time of the day or night. You don't have to not eat before bedtime because you're worried about an insulin spike that will suppress growth hormone and melatonin, right? Because you're not getting an insulin spike. You're getting a mild insulin bump with your protein, but not much. You eat as much as you want. And that's literally the case. As much as you want, as much as your body's telling you. Not as much as, I want to eat this whole buffalo. Okay, we may want that, but your body doesn't want that. You eat until your body tells you to stop. So if you're eating meat and it tastes good, your body still wants it. You have chemical receptors in your stomach that actually track up your vagus nerve to your brain. And your brain can actually track the macro and micronutrients that are sitting in your stomach. Your body tracks nutrients, not calories. And so your brain can actually see the nutrients that are in your stomach. And so it says, okay, we need more of this. We need more of this. Meat's still tasting good. Meat's still tasting great. And then all of a sudden your body's saying, actually, we've got a pretty good amount of this. We can slow this down. And all of a sudden it doesn't taste as good. So first bite is going to taste amazing. And the next bite's going to taste amazing, amazing, good, good, okay, all right. And you're going to get to a point where it just sort of tastes like cardboard. Even though it's the same piece of meat cooked at the same time in the same conditions, it's still warm. And so why is that tasting different? Why did it taste like the best thing in the world with the first bite and now it's just kind of eh? Because your body knows what the nutrients are in there and they're saying that's it. And that's how in nature animals regulate how much they eat. They don't have a dietitian or a calculator to figure out their macros and how many calories they're getting in. I've never seen a koala pull out a calculator to figure out its calories for the day. They just eat. And there's something in them that tells them when to stop. And that for us is taste. It's probably for them too. But so you eat until it stops tasting good. And you do that as many times during the day as your body wants. If you finish a whole big plate, even if it's more than you think you should ever eat in one time, and it tasted good to add that last bite, you need to go make some more, especially if you're
Okay.
working out because you need that. You may need more nutrition.
So, okay, when it comes to what you're cooking your beef in, I mean, I
Mm.
assume olive oil's out, coconut oil's out,
Yeah.
dairy, butter, things like that, ghee.
Butter's
What's
good. Ghee is better. Ghee has a higher smoke point. And then grass-fed tallow. Grass-fed ghee is great. Grass-fed tallow is great. Duck fat, goose fat, lard, animal fats,
mm,
especially things that are solid at room temperature. Butter's going to have a lower smoke point, so unless you're cooking sort of a low temperature, sort of like eggs or something like that, or sautéing something lightly, then you probably want to use something besides butter. Even coconut oil has a higher smoke point too. It's solid at room temperature. It's not going to oxidize as like the olive oils or canola oils are, which is not good. If people were wondering, but the problem with coconut oil is it's a plant oil. So it's going to have the plant sterols, the plant cholesterols, and that's going to interrupt your normal cholesterol cycles in your body as well. And so for that, and a few other reasons, I don't use those. So you want to use animal fats, and typically the best to cook with would be things like ghee and tallow.
okay, awesome. That's super clear. Well, I'm going to give it a go. I'm sold.
Nice.
Thank you so much for spending the time, and appreciate it's late in Perth. Could speak to you all day. So many questions and things, but I do know you have a pretty extensive YouTube channel, which I'm pretty sure people who have questions can go and find the answers there, including myself. Last one from me is anyone who wants to dive deeper into this. Obviously, you got your YouTube channel. You mentioned the talk you did about athletic performance, which we'll put on the in the show notes. I'll recommend or point people towards your Q&A you did with Dr. D'Agostino and Angela Pop, I think it
Mm.
was, on the Initiative platform, which was great. Any other books, any other resources that people can, really want to dive deep? Where can they go?
Yeah, well, I have a website. It's just DrAnthonyChaffee.com. And I have a lot of resources on there. I have a lot of links for papers and studies and links to other videos and things. So if you look up cholesterol, it's going to have a whole bunch of studies and videos and links and things like that as well. So you can sort of jump into that as well. And that will give a lot of resources as well. If people want to sort of look at these things, I mean, you can go back and start reading the books from major researchers, major clinicians who have figured this out 150 years before any of us did. Dr. J.H. Salisbury wrote a book called The Relation of Alimentation and Disease back in the 1800s after he did a 30-year research project on the optimal nutrition for human beings, was living with the Native Americans who were just eating meat from the bison, things like that year round. They were extremely healthy. They were living 110, 115, 120 years, which sounds far-fetched, but I actually was taught in genetics 20 years ago that genetically we are designed to live 120 years. So that's exactly how long we should be living just naturally. But yet we're dying 40, 50 years earlier, and we're calling that a normal lifespan. It's not. We're actually being poisoned by something. We're actually being held back. And you don't die 50 years early unless you were sick for 30, 40 years leading up to it, right? And that's typically what we're seeing now. There were more books since then. There's Dr. Weston A. Price, who's a dentist who noticed in the early 1900s that people in pre-agricultural communities, when they were transitioning to more Western diet, that their face weren't developing properly, their jaws weren't developing properly, their teeth were coming in crooked, even though their parents and even their siblings had perfect dental arches, perfect jaw formations. And he figured out that this was something to do with animal nutrition. They weren't getting enough animal fats. And so he started supplementing him with cream and butter, milk, animal fats, meat, things like that. And he actually reversed these crooked teeth and dental misdevelopments and things like that. Wrote a whole book on that, which is pretty fascinating. There's a Weston A. Price, and the Price Pottinger Foundation is now continuing on his work. There's even there's a book called Strong Medicine. There's a doctor in the 1960s who basically is talking about this is how you stop all these diseases. All these diseases are caused by eating the wrong thing, and you eat meat, you cut out all these plants and other stuff, you get out in the sun, you sleep properly, you form proper human connections with your family and friends, and that's basically going to take care of most diseases. There's even a study, a book in 1975 by Dr. Walter Vogeland called The Stone Age Diet, that was just that. It just argued that, look, humans are carnivores. That's just what we've been. We've been apex predators for 2 million years. This is what we've been eating for millions of years. This is what we're biologically adapted to. And basically, if you stop eating plants, my profession as a gastroenterologist ceases to exist. That's what he argued. And so there are all these sorts of books. It's not just me saying this. People, doctors and researchers have been saying this exact same thing for hundreds of years. It's been papered over by very wealthy industries that profit by the trillions of dollars every single year by having us eat plant-based junk that has extremely high markup, causes us to get sick, and then we have to spend trillions of dollars a year on medications and treatments to try to mitigate those harmful effects. Drug companies don't look for cures. They never have. And they say this. In fact, they've had leaked internal memos like from Goldman Sachs saying, is curing someone of a disease a viable business model? And the answer, of course, was no, because if you cure them of the disease, that's it. You treat them once and it's over. But if you treat their symptoms and allow them to live with the disease, then you can sell them this medication for the rest of their life. And so that is what their model is. And in fact, Goldman Sachs sent an angry letter to a company called Gilead that actually found a cure for hepatitis C, which is a very good thing to do for the world. And this is what doctors used to do. They actually tried to better the world and better humanity and cure disease. And they actually did that. My great-grandfather was a doctor in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that's exactly what he and his colleagues tried to do. And then the whole medical profession got completely corrupted by these industries. And Goldman Sachs sent a letter to Gilead saying, you messed up by curing hepatitis C. You never cure a disease. You only treat the disease. You get a better treatment for the symptoms of the disease, and then you can treat them the rest of their life. Basically, if you want our investment money, you're not going to do that bullshit again. You're going to look for symptom control so that we get a better return on our investment. We're not trying to save the world here. We're trying to make money. And so, fine, that's their profit incentive, and so they're not going to look for cures. So that's fine. Let's just not look to them for the cure. We've got to figure it out ourselves. And a lot of people have figured that out before us. And again, it's just been papered over, and meat has been vilified, and it's pushed. I mean, that's a whole other thing. Meat was vilified, and fat was vilified in order to protect the junk food industry, the sugar industry, and the junk food industry, because that looked like it was causing heart disease. And so they were like, okay, well, we need to cover that up. That was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016, actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it's more likely sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol causes heart disease. End of discussion. Will broach an argument. And that just shut down the discussion. That had been hotly debated since the 50s. And now it was just like, nope, teacher said so. End of discussion. And that's where we've been for the last 40 years. It's fraud. It's known, documented fraud. And so, there was a number of books that actually showed exactly what I'm talking about. You go back to the medical textbooks. In 1910, I have my great-grandfather's medical textbook by Sir William Osler, who was the first professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. And he was knighted for his work in medicine. He's Sir William Osler. And his medical textbook, there's a chapter on diabetes. You know what the only treatment that we had for diabetes before insulin came in the 1920s, so it was back in 1910 this book was written, it was a carnivore diet. You put people on
Really?
a meat-based diet, you get rid of carbohydrates, and you eat equal parts protein and fat. And that was the only thing that kept diabetics alive, 1 or 2. They didn't differentiate back then. And they said that for the younger crowd, there's a high mortality rate, but it wasn't 100%. And this kept people alive 8, 9 months to a year without insulin. And then many of them actually survived long term. That's in the literature, that's in the medical textbooks that I have on my shelf, right?
1910.
1910. And that was
Oh,
the treatment for diabetes since the late 1700s, right? And then we came up with insulin, and just everything became about insulin,
mm.
right? And so we've forgotten our roots. We've forgotten what people have known and paid dearly to figure out, in generations before us. So there are so many books, so many books that are fantastic, and I sort of list some of them in my website as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I mean, when are you going to write yours? When's this happening?
So yeah, so I've mostly written my book. I'm just sort of trying to do the finishing touches on it now. It's just life's been pretty busy this past
I'm
year,
sure.
so I haven't been able to get a chance to really sit down and crack at it. But that's my mission for the next few weeks, couple months, is just to finish this thing up and get it out there.
Okay, nice. Well, best of luck. Well, once it's out, do let us know, and maybe do a part 2, and yeah,
Yeah,
we can support your work. We'd love to do that.
um,
We've taken
that'd
up
be
so
great.
much of your time, Dr. Chaffee. Thank you so much for wasting your time with me. But it was a pleasure, and yeah, really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me. It's great to see.